Hey everyone, welcome back to our Azure Functions series. Today we are tackling an interesting topic, securing Azure Functions, which we'll split into two video series. We'll cover environment variables, authentication with Azure Active Directory, managed identities, key vault for data securing, API key-based authentication, and role-based access control. Let's begin. First, let's talk about environment variables, the foundation of securing sensitive data, like API keys, database connections, and credentials. In Azure Functions, we store this in local.settings.json for local development, and in Azure App Settings when deployed. Let's open local settings.json and add an N variable for our local debugging. You should place it under the values section. Just add a new key value pair there. It should be a string to string and not include a double underscore or colon. Let's call it environment with value local. Now it's all accessible in your function. Just import OS and get it from os.environ. After executing the function locally, we can see that N variable successfully received. Next, to add it to your deployed function, you should go to Azure portal, select your function app, follow to the settings, click Environment Variables. In this interface, we have all our environment variables listed, and we can add new one, name it, and add a value. We can skip deployment slots for now, as we are running our app in default production environment. But in future, it can be useful when we want to have separate N variables for stage and prod deployments. To debug it, we need to start logs streaming from the production environment and click the execute function on deployed version of it. After that, when we follow to the log streaming page, we will see that environment successfully picked it up in this line. Currently, our app is fully public, and anyone can access it, as we have authorization level set to anonymous. It seems like a right time to introduce Azure Active Directory, authentication securing your app by requiring users to authenticate via Azure AD before accessing it. This is done by adding Azure Active Directory as an identity provider in your Azure Function app. Go to the Settings, Authentication tab in your Function app, click Add Identity Provider, then select Microsoft in the Identity Provider field. Now we need to make sure that mandatory fields are correctly selected. As we don't have an app registered yet in Azure Active Directory, we'll do it here. First, name your app. Let's call it AD Secure. Then set the secret expiration and select who will be able to use your app. As we are aimed to use it only for testing purposes, we will pick a single tenant account type, where only accounts listed in Azure Active Directory can use it. But if you want to allow users from other tenants organizations to use it, we can select a multi-tenant or multi-tenant personal or personal Microsoft accounts. Then, in the additional checks, we keep the values as they are, because we want to allow requests only from this application, permit requests from any identity, and allow requests for specific tenants where this tenant is listed. This way we can create it and permissions will be set to read by default. Now, when we try to run this function, we will receive a 401 status code. If we copy the function URL and paste it into the browser, it will request a specific permissions from Active Directory. Once granted, we can use the function again. This means that from now on, a new token parameter must be present in the request headers for authentication. Let's find a way to obtain it. First, click Edit on the newly created identity provider. Copy the tenant ID from there. Then add it to this placeholder link. Next, create a grant type, client ID, client secret, and scope, keys. Set the grant type to client credentials, then copy a client ID and client secret from the Azure portal. Finally, copy a scope. Append it with /.default. Send the request and you will receive a token. Now let's copy the function URL and try running it with an access token. As you can see, our endpoint is now secured and integrated with Azure Active Directory. That wraps up the first part. We have learned how to use environment variables and secure our function with Azure AD. In the second part, we will explore managed identities with Key Vault, API key-based authentication, and role-based access control for access management. Stay tuned for the part 2, where we take security to the next level.